But just in Hugh's life, one of the things that came up in a newspaper clipping was the family was living just near Chatham, and this was one of the parsonages that they lived in off of what is now Communications Road, which you go by if you're on the 401, and it was just north of the 401, and he was in the manse there, and there was a fire that happened in the middle of the night. Apparently most of the family had gone to bed. Hugh and one of the children, one of the boys I believe, were still awake, and when this fire struck, it was a chimney fire, and they were able to get everybody out of the house very quickly, but the manse went up in flames. They weren't able to save it, but thankfully all the family members were able to get out. And this was just prior to Annie Grace Fitzpatrick Cowan first being born. And I always wondered why she was born in Toronto, even though they weren't living in Toronto at the time. So apparently what happened was, having lost the home in the manse, which was later rebuilt, Granny Cowan would have returned to the Toronto area, probably where Dr. Jim Wood was already established, her brother. And that's probably why Aunt Grace was born in Toronto rather than where the family had been living in the various sequence of churches. One of the many mysteries, and even to look at where he went to school, having gone not just to something local here in Ontario, but going to Manitoba. And then he went on in his studies to Knox for his work in the divinity program there at Knox University, or Knox School in Toronto. And then Queen's was where he got his Bachelor of Divinity. So he had those 3 school experiences with that, having achieved a Bachelor of Divinity and a Master's degree in addition to his initial bachelor's degree. So in his time, quite remarkable. And he was a middle child. He wasn't the eldest. So the idea of how he could have managed that, both the finances and just the sense of independence to do that, stands out as something quite remarkable. I have been able to get from both the Manitoba College, as it was then, some of his grades and other transcripts that were part of it, so you can actually see some of the courses that he took. And then similarly, information from Knox and from Queen's, which was disconcerting for somebody like myself, who you wouldn't want the grades being passed on all those years later. He was somebody that's achieved very good grades, and he did receive an honor in one of the courses that he took, where he took a medal of some kind. And probably not altogether pleased that you and I are doing these kind of things right now, of saying shh, because that wasn't their way. They were not people that were known to brag or to talk about their world. It was just the way it was, and they did what they did, and that's who they were, and what would you expect? So that part's probably not inconsistent.
In his book, The Great Drama of Human Life, Hugh Cowan is described as, quote, a student for 36 years of Christian thought, who believes that in the Christ concept of the soul of God and the God-created potentiality of man, we have the clue to the truth concerning the destiny of the human family, who believes also that the achievement of the worldwide brotherhood prophesied by Christ is the premier duty of the present-day Christendom. His book is described as a historical survey of the progress of the world Christward during the last half-century, with a forecast of what Christendom will be believing and teaching at the close of the present half-century concerning the destiny of the human family.
You do see some threads of history in terms of religion. It seemed that the beginnings were all Scottish Presbyterians, so that would be consistent with not only their religious background but their culture. People who were from Scotland were traditionally either Presbyterian or Catholic, and there was usually not a lot of overlap. It was one or the other. Once you get past the generation of Reverend Hugh, who was a Presbyterian minister before moving to the United Church of Canada, once the merger of the Presbyterians and some of the Presbyterians and the Methodists and others became the United Church. The next generation down, you don't see the same level or intensity of religiosity or religious practice, which isn't unusual for pastors' kids. Sometimes being a pastor's kid, you see so much of the difficulties and challenges of that, and a price is often paid by children of ministers and priests and others that are serving because of the intense work that's involved. You do see some of the next generation that had a Catholic tradition, which would be more of a change in terms of that time, moving from a Protestant to Catholic tradition. You have some others that didn't practice at all in terms of anything obvious in terms of their faith for that. So the children, I guess in a sense, continued that sense of independence. So it wasn't a cookie cutter where you saw generation after generation being exactly the same, but instead you have a lot of variety happening within that, which I guess suits that other trait that they all seem to have. You find some of the later generations where spiritual life became more important again, and you see that in some of them. But in terms of people in formal ministry, as far as I can tell, you have Reverend Hugh, and then you have no one else that's actually ever had a formal ministry other than myself in terms of that, although other members of the family having different spiritual interests and spiritual activities and religious affiliations.